Hi, and a very warm welcome. I'm Andy Steer, the UK and Ireland CTO for Entity Data Business Solutions, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. If your company currently runs SuccessFactors, but you feel that there are some areas that could be improved on, maybe a few things that aren't running as efficiently as you'd like them to, then this is the session for you. We're going to be discussing our Run Better services and how we deploy those for customers to help them really optimize the investment that they've made in SuccessFactors and hopefully to help them make more efficient use of that technology investment. So for today's session, I'm very pleased to be joined by two very special guests, Harriet and James. Harriet, how are you?
Yeah, well, thank you, Andy.
Good. James, nice to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you, Andy.
Okay, great. So we collectively are going to be talking about, I think, a recent Run Better engagement that we had with a pretty large UK-based capital investment and infrastructure management company. We're going to discuss how we came to start the engagement, how the service was structured, and what we discovered along the way. And then I guess we'll kind of give a bit of a hint as to some of the recommendations and some of the things that the customer decided to do at the end of it. So, James, let me start with you. Tell us a little bit about the customer, and I guess more importantly, why did they come to us for this?
Yeah, so this was a customer who kind of engaged with us because they'd implemented SuccessFactors quite a few years ago, been using the solution as it was kind of implemented then. But they were kind of frustrated in terms of what they were using it for and how the solution was actually being used. So they implemented the modules kind of in silos. It was more of a technical implementation, but they kind of ran with. So there weren't any real end-to-end processes that they had in place covering kind of HR from kind of hire to retire, covering payroll, etc. So they wanted someone to come in and kind of review what they were doing with SuccessFactors, but not only from a technical perspective, but also from their process as well, because their processes seemed quite inefficient. There was lots of kind of manual interventions. Processes were not initiated by employees or by managers, so there was a real heavy workload on the HR department. So they had real frustration in how they were using SuccessFactors, and they didn't really have time to kind of step back and look on how they could improve the services they offered and how they could really devolve out kind of the processes and the solution to the wider audience in terms of to employees and to managers.
Okay, so this is classic example, right, of where we try to put these Run Better services, because a lot of the time you kind of would point people towards like some kind of technical health check, right? Is the software set up right? But in this case, it's much more than that. As you say, it's about alignment between the software implementation you have and the desires and goals of the organization and the processes that you're trying to support. So that's an important difference here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, you know, lots of organizations kind of think they can implement SuccessFactors and it's for kind of solution to all their processes. But yeah, you really do need to look at those, how the kind of interaction, what the experience is for employees and managers is, so you get a more holistic view.
Okay, so you mentioned processes there. So let's talk about the process of delivering the Run Better workshop with them. Harriet, give us a little bit of a flavour for how we structured things and how it came together.
Yeah, sure. Typically when we do this, there are kind of 3 stages that we go through. So the first stage just helps us understand from different perspectives the context of the organization, their priorities, things like the setup of HR, and just begin to get a sense of what's working well and where are those pain points. And we do that through a couple of different routes. So things like stakeholder interviews, so chatting to people from the HR team, but also from the wider business. We'd also review any of the organization's kind of key documentation so that we can get a better understanding of how the system's been set up, the processes in place, the policies, the procedures that James was talking about. And then we typically look at things like your SuccessFactors queries or tickets that you're getting through from the business. So seeing if there are any trends in particular pain points that people are experiencing. And that first stage all helps us narrow down those areas of concerns, but actually where there are real opportunities to make improvements. We then take those into a second stage And typically we run the second stage through a series of focused Run Better workshops. So here we'll use things like design thinking techniques, where we journey map the experience of HR, of managers, of employees, just to really help us clarify where some of those improvements can be made. And then lastly, we take all of that information and our team analyze it and formulate a series of recommendations. And what we're really looking for is, what are those kind of short-term actions or those quick wins that an organization can take where they'll see some of those tangible improvements quite quickly? And then where are those medium-term items that might form a bit of a roadmap for the organisation to follow over a few months, where they might then be able to adjust and make some additional improvements?
Okay, so that's excellent. So there's two interesting things that I guess I'd like to call out there. So number one, very importantly, so you're saying this is engaging, across the organisation. So you covered there's kind of some techie stuff, information that you gather. What have they got the ability to use, for example, within the software? But then also, very importantly, you want to engage with the business stakeholders to get their view and their understanding of what they think they need, right? And that's really important to blend those things together, right?
Exactly. And often, like James says, it's the combination of people, process, technology, and it's those three things that make it work. Or if one of those is out of line, i.e. you don't have the engagement from the business or the confidence from the business, or the tools not set up in the right way, or your policies aren't supported by the tools or the people, those three things really have to happen in harmony.
Okay, and the Run Better approach, which we've kind of standardized, as you said, with the various tools, diagnostics, workshop types, all of those things. It's important to remember, of course, that we want to engage with customers to understand how much of this or how little of this they actually need, because that's going to vary by customer, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And often it's people that tell you where things are working really well, where there are areas that they feel like improvements can be made, because they're living it every day in the business, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's a good point. So let's talk. So with the customer that we were talking about here, this large capital investment infrastructure management company, a mouthful. Let's go into some of the examples there. So going through the workshops, give us an idea of some of the issues, some of the challenges that were uncovered by the team.
Yeah, it was an interesting one for us. So as James said, they'd implemented SuccessFactors a number of years ago, and they were using SuccessFactors with, I think, varied success. So in some areas, things like managing their absence, their holidays, SuccessFactors was working relatively well for them, and they had good engagement in the business and that good adoption from managers and employees. But for other areas, so things like processing new employees, making changes to employees' roles, or things like salary and processing leavers, it was just really clear that those three elements of people, process, and system were misaligned. And as a result, the teams had kind of set up some off-system manual workarounds that they'd put in place. And when I say the system wasn't set up to enable the organization, I think that's very accurate in lots of areas. So it was clear to the team, and it came out in our stakeholder interviews, that during their initial implementation of SuccessFactors, they felt like they weren't guided through the system setup or given some good advice around things like best practice or what other organizations were doing successfully, which is often the thing that helps organizations make the best decision around their initial system setup. But actually something else had also happened where, since implementing SuccessFactors, of course, the organization had changed. The business had grown, new policies, processes, procedures had been put in place, and yet there was no regular review of the system or a roadmap to ensure that the system continued to be that enabler for the business. So I think, like James said, the team, both the HR team, but also the business, could see just that there was a huge amount of potential in using SuccessFactors, but actually in its current form, there was just a lot of frustration. And I think as soon as you get that frustration and that lack of confidence, then, as a business, you're not going to get back the return and investment that you've made in that technology.
Yeah, James, just to ask you briefly, that scenario, if you like, I know we tend to call it this kind of disconnected implementation, right? Where you got a technology-led implementation and then the business kind of comes secondary to it. That is something we see quite regularly when we go in to help customers, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things where, organizations really just focus on the technology when they're implementing. They kind of work with an implementation partner. They go through a very kind of linear implementation, gathering requirements, don't really think about, how to interact with employees, what managers will think of the solution. And that's where, we see real downfalls of, lack of adoption, lack of people using the solution, then having kind of off piece kind of manual processes, spreadsheets holding information. And as soon as that starts, you get that kind of cascading effect where they continue to not use the solution and continue to be frustrated in what is perceived the kind of SuccessFactors solution.
Yeah, and so I know that in this case as well, Harriet, particularly, I think there was some real interesting things uncovered in payroll, right?
Yeah, it's a funny one here because the organisation actually outsourced their payroll to an external provider. The big pain point for them was actually collating that accurate employee data that would drive then the payroll on a monthly basis. And I think, one of the core benefits we know of having a system like SuccessFactors is that it becomes, I guess, your master of people data. We often hear that as a big driver for organizations wanting to implement an HR system is that they want to have that single source of truth. That helps them make data-driven decisions, but also it gives them confidence to run processes like payroll.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've put in place some of those, off-system manual workarounds, because, those three elements, your process, your people, your tool, aren't in harmony, then you've got a bit of an issue with that being a single source of truth. So in this particular client, as James said, they were using things like paper forms. There was also a real heavy reliance on an HR inbox. So, for example, if you were receiving an off-cycle pay rise, your manager would actually email HR. HR would then kind of seek approval for that change, often having to chase for it. So it was all done just through emails or phone calls. And then once approved, HR was then keying that data into SuccessFactors. And I think the more manual interventions that you create in a process, we know the more open to error that they are. So for things like running payroll for an HR team who are already overstretched, in this case, they're having to spend just a significant amount of time checking and rechecking the data. So had they picked up all those emails? Had they keyed all that data in SuccessFactors? So just an incredibly inefficient process. And the result being that SuccessFactors was never an accurate or up-to-date reflection of their people data. So then creating those reports for their payroll provider just became a really cumbersome process. And I think anything to do with pay, I'm sure we all know that if you're on the receiving end of not being paid on time or paid accurately, that has such an impact on people's lives and just such a detrimental effect on your employee experience overall. So here, there were just some really key areas of improvement that were very obvious quite early on. One being just really understanding what is that data needed to drive payroll? What does that need to look like? Then reviewing the upstream processes where that data is either generated or changed, and make sure that those processes are actually being supported through SuccessFactors rather than those off-system workarounds. And in turn, that gives much greater visibility and confidence in that people data. But the third element, we've touched on this a bit, is around just making sure that those new ways of working would then be adopted by the business and that they would understand the benefits of working through SuccessFactors rather than emailing that HR inbox. You can design the best process, But if people aren't willing to adopt it, then you're not going to see those improvements. That business engagement is absolutely critical to making things like this work.
Yeah, I think we hear it time and again, don't we? And we see it as well. So you mentioned in there the issues with, I think you said the classic people team inbox, right? With all the emails coming in and asking to do things. So one of the things that I think we still get quite surprised about in many organizations where we see those volumes coming in is that there's a route to kind of minimize some of that, which is about self-service, right? And the whole area of employee self-service, which I still find remarkable that people could implement a system like SuccessFactors, yet not really push the self-service element. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, like you say, we see this quite a bit, because I think the idea of self-service can feel like an enormous change for the organization, but the benefits are enormous. Just, that ability for employees to have greater visibility and control over their own data, and for managers to be able to engage, whether it's trigger processes or engage in people processes. It brings about huge efficiencies, but also much greater transparency. And through that transparency, you actually get more accurate data, because people can easily point out where that data isn't accurate. So it was a really interesting one here, because particularly when you think about it, they were utilizing self-service for things like holiday and managing absence. But more broadly than that, the rest was done through an HR inbox rather than that self-service functionality. And I think when we spoke to the HR team and wider business, I think part of this had come into, that successful embedding of SuccessFactors into the organization's ways of working. So we were told that people didn't really understand the benefits of the system, that there was limited capability in the organization to use SuccessFactors, but also that limited kind of confidence. But I think it shows you that, when you implement an HR system, or when you're going to make any changes to a system, that change management element is absolutely kind of critical. So if you're going to put something like self-service in, people need to understand why they're being asked to work in a different way, and the benefits of going through self-service rather than using an HR inbox. It needs to be really made as easy as possible for people, or there needs to be a really clear plan to build that capability and confidence in the business. But also, I think the element you really saw in the client here is that the change in behavior then needs to be reinforced. So that's both, from the top of the organization of like, this is the way we are going to work, but also from the HR team, so that when people are emailing that HR inbox, HR actually really need to play a role in supporting people to adopt different ways of working. And sometimes that means pushing back on the business to utilize self-service rather than coming through that kind of route that was actually seen as an easier route, but creates a lot of work in the background that maybe the organization doesn't see.
Yeah. So we don't suggest just closing down the mailbox, though, right? That's not.
No. And, you'll always find it in organizations that, sometimes we have exceptions where absolutely someone needs to email that inbox and we need to, put some workarounds in place. But the main drive of behavior to get people utilizing self-service is the key thing that's going to give you those efficiencies, that's going to buy back time for that HR team to actually support the business in a different way. And I think that's critical here, is that shift from HR being a kind of administrative function, letting the system do some of that hard work so that HR can interact with the business in a different way and add value to the business in a different way. And it's that some of those behavioral changes that actually longer term give you just a lot of benefits back.
And James, when we think about what Harriet was saying there, I guess this is another opportunity to point out, this is why these run better services, right? They're not just technology, tweak this, change that. They also encompass helping the organization run better, not just the software run better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that kind of example that Harry gave around, people see it as a lot easier to email HR help desk, because they can generate an email and they can kind of forget about it then. But we need to make processes very easy. We need to make solutions easy, so that actually it makes it harder for them to do the email than it does to pick up a mobile device and complete something on an app, which is very straightforward, very user friendly, and also reduces the level of admin and kind of approval processes that would need to be done kind of centrally.
Mm-hmm. So, Harriet, the services that we were able to offer and the insight that we were able to give the customers was very helpful. But I think we also uncovered perhaps a limitation of their in-house capabilities as well as to the amount of help that they needed.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one. I think organizations actually need to be quite self-sufficient in managing some of their systems. You don't want to bring in SuccessFactors consultants every time you want to make kind of a simple change in a system. And I think if you're having to do that, then of course, that those three pieces, that people, process, and technology element are going to get out of sync if you can't then keep that technology up to date with where the people and processes are in your organization. And it's such a key thing for us when we implement SuccessFactors, is that enablement piece is critical, not just for the end users, but also for that HR team that need to support that system going forward. If organizations don't have that in-house capability to make changes to the system, even simple pieces like updating a pick list, then actually that's when you start to see almost that knock-on effect of people losing confidence in the system. As the organization changes and evolves, so too must SuccessFactors, or else it's never going to be that true enabler. And I think one of the quickest elements we were able to put in place for this client was just some SuccessFactors training for their HR team. And, just that ability gave them, I guess, the option to optimize SuccessFactors both now, but also in the future. And I think that's really important, that self-sufficiency of an organization to be able to do that.
I think that's really good. And I think we would all say that ideally we want customers to be in that situation. Now we do know there are some customers where they want to take the decision to have a managed service in that area. And we help customers with that. I guess the key thing we're saying here is you've got a managed service offering or you've got some self-sufficiency. Don't find yourself in the middle where you've got neither, and then you're not able to keep the system updated and adjust it as things change.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think by that point, you've damaged the confidence in the organization of the system. And then you have to do more work to get yourself in a better position so that you're actually getting the return on investment. You're seeing the benefits from having a tool like SuccessFactors. So I think you're right, Andy, there are options for organizations of how you can do that, but having nothing is certainly, we see that creates far more problems longer term.
Yeah, definitely. Right, Harriet, thanks very much. It's a really good overview, and I'm sure for people watching, I'm sure many of those things, probably rang a few bells of familiarity for them. James, we're coming towards the end now. So if you're one of those people watching this, and the things that Harriet's mentioned and some of the warning signs that you've talked about, let's try and sort of summarize that. What should people look out for in their organizations to almost act as telltale signs or triggers, if you like, that they might need this kind of help?
I think I categorize in kind of two areas. So we've talked about kind of, looking at this from a solution and process driven. So it's across both of those really. So I think around where processes are seen as overly complex, where they seem, kind of over-engineered, difficult to follow, which leads to kind of people having a reputation of the kind of both HR and the solution within the user community being quite poor, and then that leads to people perceiving that the processes are poor, compliance is poor, and therefore user adoption is kind of really low. We also see kind of solution-driven areas. So, as I said before, where people are maintaining spreadsheets, different solutions away from like the core SuccessFactors solution, and lots of manual workarounds being used if that's kind of a key area within the organisation. And then also about reporting. So with that kind of accurate data, if there's a feeling that HR reporting is complex and takes a lot of effort, data's not easily accessible, and people don't trust the system, then again, you need to review where you are in terms of that. And then I think one of the things that kind of Harriet pointed on before, if you get a lot of help desk tickets, both requests for process support, people not understanding the solution, people getting frustrated in particular areas, then if we've got that high volume of help desk tickets in particular areas, that helps kind of focus the effort in terms of these types of reviews that we can do with people.
Okay.
And also one thing as well is maybe users are always constantly requesting new HR tools, new systems, where SuccessFactors is perceived as not being good enough. And we know that SuccessFactors is a very strong tool across the kind of whole HR landscape. So if we've got users who are thinking, actually, we want to investigate what alternatives there are, I think the first point of call would be actually, let's review how you're using the solution and what we can do to improve that, rather than a massive investment in kind of a replacement solution or kind of modular approach where you might be taking other solutions, things like recruitment, learning, etc., and look at how a really fully integrated solution could be a real good investment and give you those kind of synergies and user experience which is consistent across the board.
Okay, great. So let's just try and wrap things up then. So we know there are organizations out there, because we work with many of them, who have implemented SuccessFactors some time ago. Maybe they did some HXM transformation work at the same time. Maybe they didn't. But right now, their organization doesn't perceive it's getting the value out of that investment that it should. And that those issues can surface either, as you say, James, on the technology side, the solution side, or on the people process side. If you're one of those organizations, we've taken our experience, our tools, our diagnostics, etc., and we've packaged that up into what we call Run Better services. And that starts off with us coming in, doing some stakeholder engagement, understanding where we think the challenges are, forming those together into common themes, if you like, and then working out interventions which can improve the software, manage the change better, bring all of that people, process, technology stuff back together, and hopefully kind of accelerate you through a change program to really get the value out of SuccessFactors. So if you're sitting there thinking that sounds interesting, then get in touch. Run Better is the thing that you're after, and the Run Better workshops, which start that process, Harriet, rest of the team, James, are all geared up for delivering those. So that's what we wanted to talk about today. I think we covered it pretty well. So it remains for me to say, Harriet, thank you very much.
Thank you.
James, thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks, Andy.
I've been Andy Steer, CTO for Entity Data Business Solutions in the UK and Ireland. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully we'll see you next time.